Welcome back to another episode of the MacRumors Show. We finally have a guest. I feel like it's been a long time. Hartley and I have been talking about this for a while. Obviously, Hartley is here, but we have a wonderful guest. He's been on the show. This is probably like your third time now, I think, second or third. But we have the wonderful Jon Rettinger here. Jon, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We brought you in specifically for this topic because we're approaching the iPhone 15 launch. And you just informed me, which I already kind of figured based on some things that you've been kind of putting out there in the world. And I know you've done this in the past, but it seems as if you have switched to Android again, my friend.
I have. I figured, iPhone 15 is coming end of September-ish. Seems like a good time now for the next 2 months or so when I started to make that switch to Android. So I'm really trying all the Android phones that I wanted to spend extended time with. Until the 15 hits. So was on the Z Fold 5. After this podcast, I'm going to move on over to the S23 Ultra. I'll go over to the Pixel 7 Pro, and then I don't know, we'll see after that.
So our main topic is that we wanted to just kind of see what would make the iPhone 15 exciting again, or what the iPhone what could make the iPhone exciting again in the iPhone 15. So Hartley, you made a beautiful list of things to talk about. Why don't we start with
Thank you.
Why don't we have you lead the way here, and then we'll get Jon's take on what could make this phone exciting for people who might have made the switch like Jon just did.
Yeah, so I think there's a few fundamental things. Obviously, there's always a load of small changes with a new iPhone, but for the Pro models, which is what I think most people are interested in, I think that we're looking at just 5 major changes, which would be the action button, the titanium frame, the periscope camera for the Pro Max, the A17 Bionic, and USB-C, which to me seems like quite a lot. I don't know whether it's as much as we got with the iPhone 14 Pro, but what do you think? Do you think that's enough to justify an exciting upgrade?
I'm going to be a contrarian, I guess, on the MacRumors podcast here. The iPhone's been commoditized. It's been completely commoditized. These upgrades that people are getting excited about, mostly we're talking about frames and we're talking about a button. And we're talking about a port that probably should have been there years ago. I was having a conversation with some folks yesterday and was trying to think what it would take. What's the next iPhone wow moment, right? You go back to the original iPhone, it was multi-touch was a wow moment. A really incredible on-screen capacitive keyboard, I think, was a wow moment. I think FaceTime was a wow moment from the software side. And to a lesser extent, maybe even Dynamic Island was a slightly less exciting wow moment. I don't know what Apple can do to give another wow moment. What they can do, what they appear to do, is just slow incremental updates to make something that was already great just slightly better. And I think that's the track Apple is on. Make something slightly better, make it look slightly different. And it's an incredibly useful tool, but I don't think it's an incredibly exciting tool anymore.
I do agree. I think that's the situation that we've reached. And I think the turning point was possibly the iPhone 10. It's felt like every iPhone has really been an iteration of that. I suppose that's because that really changed the way. I think that Face ID and that redesign really did set the path. And I think that was also an exciting upgrade. But some of these individual aspects taken by themselves, for example, the 48 megapixel camera, I think was a great update last year. Overdue, for sure. But I think it's possibly more the case now that we're looking at individual features that are interesting rather than the whole package sort of changing diametrically every couple of years.
Yeah, I think it's eloquently said. And I think you're right. A lot of it is Apple catching up. Apple very rarely moves first with new trends. They couldn't have 12 and 16 megapixel cameras in their phones anymore at this point. They were forced to make a move. And I'm not belittling the utility of the iPhone. I still think the iPhone is probably the most useful tool, perhaps in all of humanity. It's just no longer a super exciting one. I think your point about the iPhone 10 is very eloquently said. That was probably peak iPhone. An iPhone 10 still looks like a modern iPhone. If you pick one up and use it, and not much has changed since then.
We've often had the conversation that the iPhone 10 was the best iPhone in the last however many, possibly ever. Like one of, maybe alongside. Like I know a lot of people like the iPhone 5, So I think that was like, those every 5 years type deal.
Right.
I mean, what's it going to be for you then in the future? Is it when they jump to foldables? I know you're a foldable fan.
Yeah, I'm a huge foldable fan. Listen, I still love the iPhone, and the iPhone is still probably going to always be my main phone that I use the majority of the year. And so none of this is to say that I don't like it or I don't enjoy using it. It makes my life the easiest out of all of the phones. But I do kind of I do wonder if the iPhone. And this is a crazy thing to say because it's such a big part of Apple's business. But if we're going to talk about the iPhone in 15 years, will we talk about the iPod now? Like, man, remember the iPod? That was a really big deal for a really long time. While we have face computers strapped on, is it going to be something that is going to be planned to be obsolete or phased out as something better clearly comes to replace it? Vision Pro gets phone call capabilities and gets rid of the stupid magic battery pack and becomes lighter and integrated a bit easier. Are we really going to be spending that much time on our phones? I don't know. I think it's very easy to say it's going to replace it, but I think it definitely merits a discussion for how things are going. Apple's been very good at predicting the next thing.
I agree. I think that is the direction that we are heading in. I think the difference with the iPod was ultimately the form factor of the iPod is kind of the same as the iPhone ultimately. So that the iPhone was able to kind of take over from the iPod instantaneously, effectively, and in quite a short space of time. Whereas the difference with head-mounted devices and the iPhone is just that difference in form factor. So we could be looking at maybe 25 years till the end of the iPhone, but I still think that's going to happen. I think that the Apple Watch is a lot more likely to stick around long-term than the iPhone as that device that you carry with you when you don't wear a headset or a pair of smart glasses or whatever direction this goes in.
Hartley, you're going to kill off the iPhone at the iPhone 40?
I can see it happening. I really can.
You can't make it 40 years and then just let it not have the iPhone 40 moment. I mean, come on.
No, but John's right. The iPod was a big deal, and it was hard to imagine that changing. But all of these things come to an end in one way or another, and they just get phased out. They just get less popular. And at the point where your Apple glasses in, 2030, 2035 are doing everything you could conceivably want to do on your phone, but better, and you've got cellular and you've got your Apple Watch, what do you even need your iPhone for anymore?
With the busy fall season just right around the corner, you might be looking for wholesome, convenient meals for jam-packed days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, can help you fuel up fast with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, you'll eat well, and stay on track with your healthy lifestyle. The fall for me means kids are going back to school, we have different after-school activities, and everything's just ramping up. So we really rely on these quick and easy, and most importantly, healthy Factor meals that are ready to eat in just 2 minutes or less to get us through the day. You can also level up with Gourmet Plus options, prepared to perfection by chefs and ready to eat in record time. Treat yourself to upscale meals with premium ingredients like broccolini, leeks, truffle butter, and asparagus. I'm still personally a huge fan of the jalapeno cheddar chicken and spicy cauliflower rice. It's just so good, and I'm sad I don't have one to eat right now. But this August, you can get Factor and enjoy eating well without the hassle. Simply choose your meals and enjoy fresh, flavor-packed meals delivered to your door and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. No prep, no mess. So head to factormeals.com/Mac50 and use code MAC50 to get 50% off. That's code MAC50 at factormeals.com/Mac50 to get 50% off.
So let's play it forward, right? Let's assume a foldable iPhone comes at some point and it's a different line of iPhone for a few years until it becomes the main iPhone. What can Apple do with their iPhones moving forward, right? They're very clearly shrinking bezels. They're very clearly looking to hide Face ID and all of those sensors behind a camera. They've, as far as Apple goes, been pretty quasi-vocal about wanting to remove all ports, right? Remove all mechanical buttons on the phone. Maybe screens will get a higher refresh rate. Maybe they'll go higher resolution. Cameras will get better. Zoom will get better. Eventually, that'll make its way to the non the non-Pro line. Processors will get more powerful, more efficient. Maybe if we cross our fingers and our toes, battery technology will slightly improve. But we're right now, where do you go from there? After that, where do you go?
Folding. That's the only direction. You go to
That's it. That's it, right?
Yeah, that's it, honestly. And then unless there's something else that gets introduced later on down the line, that's still, a traditional phone per se. But, and then eventually, if you end up being correct, which I do think you will be correct, in the way that like the iPhone wouldn't be, would be like the iPod, but I don't know that it's Vision Pro in its current state. I think it's more slim glasses mixed with like
Absolutely.
AirPods. No one wants to walk around town constantly with a giant headset on. Like and we all know that that's obviously not going to happen in the future. That's the long-term plan, is to get it to be glasses that are very nonchalant. But yeah, no, I think folding phones are the future, but I just don't know if Apple sees it that way right now, because I mean, they're very behind, which, we've talked about many, many times. Apple is usually not first and they want to take their time with things, but like, I don't know, we're 5 years in. Almost every major company now has a foldable that's not Apple. I literally just came from something that I cannot quite disclose yet, but like, I get more and more impressed with the more stuff I see in that like area, and I just sit there thinking, and I say the same thing, like I just want there to be an iOS version of this, and we're just not there yet.
So give Apple the benefit of the doubt, right? They come in with a first gen product that's thought out and very well executed, right? Take the Pixel Fold. I think it was a very good first attempt.
Mm-hmm.
But as somebody who spent a lot of time with it, it was very clear it was their first attempt, where Samsung is now on their fifth iteration, especially when it comes to the software standpoint. That, at least to me, was very, very clear. I don't think that would be the case with Apple. Maybe that's fanboyism or rose-colored augmented reality glasses. But I do think when Apple enters this, they'll solve problems that others haven't before. Apple's typically done that when they've entered new markets, right? Whether it's crease being gone, a new technology for the screen itself, or how the hinge is executed. I don't think Apple being late is going to matter. I think when they enter it, they're going to enter it really well. I think we'll see the first glimpse of that, at least according to a very trustworthy rumor site that I read all the time about Macs. You may have heard of it. But iPad foldable becoming first, as Apple sort of tests those waters. But it's hard to see where phones in general are going next, and maybe that's part of the fun, right? There's mystery there. There's still something yet to be unveiled. But aside from shrinking bezels and putting things behind camera, and then just iterative spec improvements, like what's going to happen? Is it software? Is there going to be a killer software, something that we're going to get that's going to change everything for us?
How can I let's bring it back to the 15 that's coming in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Can I interest you in an action button? I need to know your thoughts.
I mean, I have a hard time getting excited and geeked out about like a button. The action button on my Apple Watch Ultra literally just calls my wife. I'll probably change it to.
That's a good idea.
Like a profile switcher, or maybe a shortcut. Like after that, like I don't care. I'm gonna completely forget about the action button. Probably 20 minutes after I get the phone. What is exciting, I know this is pretty niche for a lot of people, is if the Pro models get Thunderbolt speeds, which is potentially the option to even edit video off of a 2 terabyte iPhone. Would be incredible. Being able to use that for ProRes and ProRAW and all that kind of stuff would be huge if that ends up being true. And I will say, I commend Apple for the USB-C transition. I know their hand was forced a little bit prematurely about what's happening in the EU. But Phil Schiller did go on stage in 2012 and say that the Lightning port was a port for the next decade. So he did tell us that this was coming.
I also think that titanium is a really significant change because, and I know it's iterative because we're going to get it in more or less the same design that we've had to date. But it's important to bear in mind that the iPhone went from plastic to stainless steel, from stainless steel to aluminium, and from aluminium back to stainless steel. We haven't had anything like this in the whole of the history of the iPhone, which has these properties of being both lighter and more durable. And even just the finish of it has the potential to just look very different to something that we've had before. Again, the question is, where do you go after titanium? That's it. We've reached peak iPhone in terms of what we can do with materials. It's always got to have glass on the back for wireless charging. And there's no metal, basically, really, that they have at their disposal at this time other than titanium. So, yeah, it just seems to be iterative to me. Ceramic's a possibility. It's very brittle, but I loved it on the Apple Watch, personally, so I'd be really interested in that. Maybe for an Ultra model or something like that in the future.
Are we getting a 15 Ultra this year?
What do you mean, like the name, or we? I think it's going to be Pro Max.
Is a Pro Max going to be the Ultra?
Harley.
It has been rumored this week that the name will change. It's been mentioned a few times throughout the cycle, but I don't think it will be. I think that the current plan, as far as we understand, is that the Ultra will come, just not this year, and it will come when there are more significant changes for that larger model. Whether it's a whole new model, a bit like the Apple Watch Ultra that sits above the whole lineup to kind of re-inject a bit of energy into the iPhone lineup, or it's just a replacement for the Pro Max, is an open question. And it's because we're moving to this direction where each of the iPhone models has a different feature set, which I know is not what a lot of people want. But this year, we're getting right back into that with the periscope camera. Next year, that is going to follow with a bunch of stuff with regards to cameras. So that seems to be the direction we're headed in, and you can kind of see how Ultra would work.
I have a question for you guys. So
Go on.
Let's say hypothetically you're Tim Cook, and out of all the swath of technology that currently exists or is coming, I'm not talking like holographic keyboard or anything crazy. What are you doing to the iPhone? What changes are you making? So say iPhone 17, right? 16 is already in the pipeline, it's already designed. What changes are you making, software, hardware? What are you adding?
I mean, this comes down to personal preference ultimately. But if it was my decision, and this is going to be no surprise to Dan, but I would love to see them reconsider the actual form factor and go for something that be brave enough to go for something that is smaller and lighter, and really see if they can use the efficiency improvements of their chips to make more of their battery life as well. And kind of go back to basics a little bit and kind of go back to some of these priorities that we had, or at least that Apple had for the iPhone going back 8 years or so, maybe a little longer than that. But I think it is difficult because it is just a feature by feature iteration. I mean, we know that Apple is working on micro LED displays as well, their own custom display technology. That should be really interesting. It should be way more efficient, and it should look very different as well. So that will be exciting. But is it going to be as significant as the jump to OLED was? I don't know.
Right. You know what I keep fantasizing about in terms of design is just like a modern version of the like original iPhone design. I don't know why, but like if they could figure out a way to bring like what would probably be the 20th anniversary at this point, like of the iPhone, the original iPhone, it looks the same, but it's, glass and titanium somehow. That would be really nice. I don't know why. I just really that's not my answer, but just going off of what you were saying, like I thought that would be really cool. I don't know. I think for me mine would be more like software based and allow just more customability, like customizing, but I just know that's not going to happen. I don't know. Like a major overhaul of the OS, I feel like needs to happen. Which speaking of, John, I want to talk about your move to Android. What about some of these phones what phone are you currently using? Is it the Fold 5? Z Fold 5?
So right now the Z Fold 5. And I think like me, a lot of people who are on iOS, it's just too much of a hassle to switch to Android for a lot of people, right? I don't want to lose AirDrop. I don't want to lose iMessage. I really like X feature on this Android phone, but like it's too big a pain. 100%. I'm in the same boat. I have found some solutions to mitigate that. And they're not necessarily hacks either. So the big one was iMessage. I got access to an app called Beeper.
Yep.
that currently has a wait list, and it's essentially iMessage forwarding. But for me and for the end user, I can still use iMessage on my Mac. They send the iMessages to my phone number. Really, nobody has any idea I'm on Android at all. It works almost flawlessly. It's encrypted through Beeper servers, which I don't love, but it's better than SMS. There's got to be some sort of compromise, I guess. That has completely solved the iMessage issue for me. And I used iCloud Drive and still use iCloud Drive for everything. It makes my life so much easier. But now I also use Google Drive Backup for my computer. So that has sort of solved those two things. And it does essentially the same thing. There are some apps and websites you can visit that mimic AirDrop. There's nothing that comes quite close to bridging that gap that I found. I've tried all the other apps and websites out there that kind of do it. So I do miss that. And then also being able to sort of use the tracking features that are built in for my kids and that kind of stuff and AirTags. I do miss that. But I will say, kind of forcing myself to make that Android switch, you start to find solutions as you get over that, like, this is a little harder than I'm used to hump. And I'm appreciating now on some of these phones that I'm testing a 10 times optical zoom camera here on the S23 Ultra, which is incredible. I would never have that before. The S Pen functionality built in. I'm excited to switch on after next week or so the Pixel 7 Pro and sort of try some native software solutions. So a lot of these big concerns are less. I love that I can put icons anywhere I want on the home screen.
Hardly.
That's incredible.
Do you hear that?
Yeah.
I love that I can make that I can just make a widget to direct call my wife without having to hack it through a shortcut. That's awesome.
Yep.
And I'm enjoying the customization that you get with Android. I am missing the Face ID. I'm not gonna lie. Nothing is as good as Face ID. I'll never understand why Google killed it with the 4XL. Their Project Solar was incredible.
Well, I always find these discussions interesting because I have never used Android.
Right. And every time we talk about this, it's always me saying the same stuff. So I need to hear from you because you guys know my thoughts. I've done the same thing that John's done. Beeper is an incredible app.
Never used Android?
Never.
No,
ever?
Never.
I mean, I've used it in a store, but I've never actually had an Android device and switched to it for any period of time. I'm nothing if not committed to Apple, so I don't know if it gives me a bit of a unique perspective, but it's interesting because I'm always tempted. There is always stuff that tempts me, and I have to say it is the foldables now more than ever, and especially the Z Flip, just that form factor. I'm not such a big fan of the kind of like the book shaped foldable form factor. But it's just the ecosystem. It's Android more than it is the hardware that just gets me. Because while these services like Beeper are great, and you see these things come across from time to time, these different apps and services to try and bring things into a little bit closer alignment, it's just never going to be as smooth as keeping within the walled garden. So one day I'll try it. One day I will be sure to make that leap, but it's going to have to be a pretty impressive Android device to be able to persuade me.
I do think you said something interesting. I think for a lot of, I don't want to say like loyalists, people are just used to the iPhone. Android has to offer something different to make that switch, right? You switch from an iPhone 14 Pro or Pro Max to an S23 Ultra. It's not really that different. But the foldables is where you start to see something that Apple cannot offer right now. And I think for a lot of people, I completely agree with you. Either the Z Flip, Z Fold, Pixel Fold, something, one of those form factors offers something that Apple just cannot do right now with their current crop. So I think a lot of people are contemplating making that switch, especially if the 15 line is as iterative as it appears to be. I think we'll see people trying something new, whether they stay there or not. Who knows?
I often struggle with do I want to make the full switch? And I talk about it constantly. And I've used Beeper, and I still carry around two phones. And I'll do that thing where I'll leave my iPhone at home, just in upstairs away, and just use the Android phone that I'm carrying around as the thing that's attached to my hip. But it doesn't matter unless you make that full, like, put the SIM card in your phone, make the full switch, commit. And the only way I think you can do that to where you get the smoothness of like that phone's actual potential is if you just say, screw everyone that has an iPhone. I don't care if I am in an iMessage conversation or not. You will have to deal with this. That is the only way that you get the full extent of it, is that you're just making everybody's conversations green.
Not with Beeper.
I mean, I like Beeper. I have it. I mean, it's definitely the best solution out of all of the ones that I have tried so far. Mostly because you just don't have to do anything besides log in on a computer just briefly, just set it up there. And then it's not like the computer has to run constantly or have like a server. That's not how it works. You just have to have it on something logged in. And then that is really it. And then you can just download the app on your phone and it works totally fine. I just
and it
feel
sends
like
pictures full res, it sends video full res. You're not shrinking them like it happens with SMS.
But I feel like if you're going to be a real Android user, you just got to do what real Android users do and just not care. They just don't care.
One part of the Switch that has been very surprising to me, and I'm saying this before I've tested the Samsung's Watch 6 Classic, which I have coming later today. The Android wearable market, taking that out of the equation because I haven't tested it yet, is atrocious. I've got the Pixel Watch on. I think I'm wondering what percentage of people who don't like the Pixel Watch is. If it's the same percentage of people who, I'm wondering if the percentage of people who like the Pixel Watch, the same percentage of people who have never tried the Pixel Watch. It is horrible in almost every way.
You don't like it?
Horrible wearable experience. It is a horrible wearable experience.
Explain what's so bad about it.
Well, the first thing, if I wanted to set up Google Wallet on here, it's not secure enough for American Express.
Oh boy,
so that's a big one. I can't use my watch for the mobile payment app of my choice. So that, I think that alone says something. It's constantly checking my heart rate. So my battery life after 3 hours is at 87%. Got down to 6% yesterday at the end of the day. It's trying to do a software update. It's been trying now for the past 5 days, but the watch has to be plugged in to do it. So I keep doing that, and I keep plugging it in, hitting update. And then it says downloading, and I take a shower, and it doesn't download, doesn't install. And now it's been almost a 7-day process trying to get the apps to upload. Way it handles notifications is atrocious. When someone sends me a picture, I don't see a picture. It just says image in there. It's circular, and I like that. And I don't have huge wrists, but it looks like a kid's toy on my very not large wrist. I don't like anything. I really don't like anything about it. I'm hoping that the Watch 6 Classic is going to be like the sweet spot. I've heard a lot of good things. I know Michael Fisher had some very positive things to say about it. So I am optimistic, but man, that Pixel Watch is, I'm sorry for everybody out there who bought one that's going to justify and probably send me messages yelling at me. It's not good. And if you've used anything else, you're very quickly aware that it is not good.
You know what I've come to realize is that there really just isn't any other watch that's better than an Apple Watch. And it's not because we're just like fans of Apple. It's not the same experience. Like, and there are good Wear OS watches out there. They're just not anywhere near the same level as an Apple Watch in terms of the way it interacts with the device. And the Apple Watch isn't even perfect. I mean, there are some issues that we can really dive into if we wanted to, especially with syncing and things. But just when it does work really well, which for me is most of the time, it's unmatched compared to some of the others out there. And I do have the Watch 6 Classic. I really like it. I really want a circular Apple Watch, so like I've been into the circular models and the way they look, and I think those look better. But you're right. The performance on some of them and the way that it works with the phone that you're using, and also you're using that Pixel Watch with a non-Pixel device, right?
I am using it with a non-Pixel.
So I wonder if there's any issue there. I mean, there shouldn't be, and the way it's advertised is that it shouldn't, but you never know.
Yeah. And before I know I'm going to get people are just going to scream at me. I've tried the Garmin watches. Don't at me. If there's one area where Apple is really far ahead, it is in the wearable department. It's not even close. As of right now, I'm hopeful that will change. But man, the wearables are where Apple I think has a huge advantage.
Although with Garmin, I will say that they are pretty far ahead in terms of like health features and tracking. I know a lot of like
They do a very nice job with that.
yeah, a lot of like serious runners and cyclists and swimmers and stuff will not even touch an Apple Watch when it comes to things like that. They're very far into that Garmin lifestyle because it's just better, apparently. Obviously, I am not a triathlete, so I can't comment on that, but you know.
But for the general, I think notification wanting public
Yes.
with some health features built in, I think those are more like niche cases.
Yeah.
There's really nothing better.
Hartley, your thoughts?
Well, I also will be no surprise. Have not tried a rival watch.
Right.
But yeah, I think that in terms of market share, Apple is just so far ahead. It's very hard to see how that is going to change. And I think that with something like foldables, Apple can catch up with a situation that is vice versa, because comparatively, foldables are still a tiny part of the smartphone market. But smartwatches, if you want a smartwatch, there's basically only one way to turn, and that is driving iPhone sales as well.
Have you guys ever thought about going cellular and using your phone less kind of deal? I know there's a lot of people in the YouTube world that make videos like that. John?
I couldn't. I couldn't do it. Sadly rely too much just for my day-to-day business. It would definitely impact a lot of my job to not be able to get that. But I would love if I could. I'm certainly on my phone way more than I should be.
So
I'd be interested to try it.
You would. You there's nothing that well, I guess I mean, so a lot of the ways people get around that is like, well, I use my Mac all day, so like I can do the things that I need to substitute.
Yeah, that's how it would be for me.
Yeah. But like when you're off of work, you know, like I don't know about you, Hartley, but for me and John, we got kids. I can't be taking my computer with me during family stuff, and if I have that little bit of dull time where I want to check X, if we're just going to call it by what it is, although it's still Twitter to me. If we're going to check that, I can't whip out the laptop at the zoo and just start browsing, you know, while the kids are in the bathroom or something. It's just not as convenient. Can't do it on your watch. I guess it makes you maybe a better a person because you're not on the platforms. You're detaching yourself. So that's probably the one aspect that's good there. But I agree. It's hard to do, to just not have a phone with you at all times.
I think I would love to be able to ultimately get to that point. I think that's the goal. If I could throw all my phones away and just be a bit more present, I think would be nice. So I got a question for you guys. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot, and I see it all the time in comments and stuff when people talk about Apple. You see it. Apple's trying to steal my money. Apple's a scam. All that kind of stuff. And I think the perspective that maybe some people are missing out on is Apple is a publicly traded company, and Tim Cook's job is to the shareholders exclusively. And any product that comes out is to increase value to the shareholders. Now, you can like that, you can dislike it, but that is the job of the CEO of a publicly traded company. Mm-hmm. It's not to make products that you or I are going to love and adore. It's to make products that people will buy and services that people will buy. I'm setting up for something here as I get there. In that vein, and I'm assuming that one of the biggest things that's holding people to the iPhone is indeed iMessage. If you are the CEO of Apple, I alluded to this earlier with my question about what you would do if you were Tim Cook, would you say one of the things that would bring tremendous value to my shareholders would be to subscriptionize iMessage?
Yes.
On Android.
Yes.
Or on a multi-platform service. And I understand that it gets people in, and then people buy apps and all those things that ultimately make Apple money as a software service type company. But I guess I don't understand that. I'm sure there's a reason that I just don't know. I'm not privy to. I know we saw some of it with the leaked documents, from Apple. But I'm still wondering why iMessage, and I would imagine iMessage is a standalone business, if they spun it off, would be more valuable than WhatsApp and Messenger. I mean, it would just be a multi-billion-dollar business on its own.
Yeah, I mean, that was actually going to be my response to one thing that I would do, but it was more of like, not the subscriptions, but bring iMessage to everyone. but that would not be very business friendly. But yeah, I've thought about this so many times. I don't understand. Maybe the math doesn't work, but like, let's just say it was $4.99 a month. Like, how many millions of people do you think would be paying $4.99 a month for iMessage? I feel like it would be insane.
And do you think Apple users would leave because now there's no barrier to going to Android, or do you think it would bring Android users over to Apple?
I think a little bit of both, but more so the other way. Right? Hartley, what do you think?
iPhone users going to Android?
Yeah. No.
I'm going to try and take
more so like Android to iPhone, sorry.
iOS.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and take the contrarian view with this because I don't think they should do that. And I think I sort of understand why. Let's think about, say, macOS. In the 90s, there was a lot of pressure for Apple to license macOS to other PC manufacturers. Absolutely. But they chose not to do that to secure their brand. And this is effectively the same thing. If you like, iMessage is kind of like the macOS of today in a similar context where there's so much demand to do that. Because it seems like what any other business would do, but kind of what makes Apple special is that it isn't always chasing a dollar. It looks like it is sometimes. It looks like it is when it removes, power adapters from iPhone boxes and when it, nickel and dimes you for individual features. But ultimately, a lot of what it does do, when you think about what it does, say, for accessibility, that is not delivering shareholder value. They are not always motivated by that. Even other things like they could have released Vision Pro without eyesight. It would not affect that product. The amount of money that is going into the development of that feature. That is supposed to be a genuine sort of philosophical quality of life feature. And I think that they argue that keeping iMessage inside the walled garden, it preserves the ecosystem. Because if you can do that with iMessage, why don't we bring Final Cut to Windows as well? And we can, then we can start licensing the whole of iOS. Why don't we bring a whole load of our iOS apps and put them on Android as well? We can package it all in a subscription. Why don't we just turn everything into a subscription? But and it's kind of a question of where it stops.
But what makes this different than Apple bringing over iTunes to Windows and allowing those people who could just go buy a Zune? If you wanted to have an MP3 player with a media library, you don't need to buy the songs directly from Apple's app. Go get a Zune and go buy it from Windows, whatever. I never had a Zune, so I don't know. Whatever their area was to buy. I mean, but they did it because they saw that there was tremendous value and money that they were just leaving on the table. I feel like this is no different than that in my opinion, but I do understand that this is more ecosystem based because it's how you communicate with another device as opposed to like how, I mean, I don't know. I can understand what you're saying, but I still can't be convinced that there's not a good monetary reason why they wouldn't do this.
Can I contrarian the contrarian view? If that's all right.
Let's contrarian all around.
Contrarian back, because Hartley brought up when Apple licensed their software. I think that was a very different situation, right? There was a new CEO was brought in. Steve Jobs was ousted. Apple was on very shaky financial ground. The future of the company was very much in doubt. That is certainly not the case right now. And I think to the point that Dan just made, I can use iTunes. I can watch Apple TV on my Samsung TV. Mm-hmm. Apple has done these little things in the past. And things I don't think anybody ever thought Apple would do. I never thought I would see the day when there was Apple anything on a Samsung TV. It didn't even dawn on me it was something. I understand the reasons, and I don't think Apple will ever do it for the reasons that Hartley said. And I think a lot of it is sort of the brand preservation, but that also is the brand perception that I think is a lot of value and value to the shareholders. So I do think they are still serving the shareholders while also not necessarily looking at the dollar amount associated with it.
So if I could contrarian the contrarian of the contrarian, I think the only reason why Apple had to do it with those other services like Apple TV Plus and obviously with what I mentioned with iTunes is because there are other businesses and people involved that are not strictly just Apple. Like there are record labels, there are artists, there are movie studios, there are movies, They're not going to accept a sign up of an exclusivity where it's like, well, no, I want this to be with anyone can get to it, not just people who are on this platform. So this, like, having iMessage only affects Apple in that regard and how they would want to market that and send it off to other people that are not buying Apple devices. But I still feel like the math out there makes sense for them to do that as opposed to not doing it, right? Well, there have to be more positives.
I just don't think it's about the. It's not about the math though, because it's kind of Apple. The whole ecosystem has this kind of structural integrity, and they can do things that are uncharacteristic. So selling a $99 HomePod is uncharacteristic. Selling Apple Music on Android is uncharacteristic. They do plenty of stuff like that. But they choose not to at the edges. So they could make a $30 streaming stick. That would be a great way to promote Apple TV Plus. They were considering doing something like that, but they choose not to because they know that they need to be a little bit careful. Otherwise, piece by piece, they are selling off what makes the ecosystem a compelling package. And iMessage is such a fundamental chunk of that. Apple TV Plus, when it started, they had to contend with Netflix. They had to really make a big effort. That's why you can get Apple TV Plus on your Roku, but Apple just has no need to give it to you on Android. It's just too important.
But do you think like the vast majority of people would like legitimately leave Apple just because iMessage is now available on another phone? I still think a lot of the core general
I don't think it's the
consumers.
point that they'd leave. I don't think it's the point that they'd leave. It's that from a business perspective, that ecosystem is so precious, and it's kind of this weird mix of stuff that makes it valuable. So if you start playing around with the fundamentals of what keeps you in that space, that's dangerous because you don't know what you're messing with.
Do you see it kind of like a test drive of a car, right? Or first taste is free. Get a sense of what you're missing. You think iMessage is good? Wait till you try our whole ecosystem. That's where will it get you. I think we could probably go around in circles with it. There's no right answer. I think Apple clearly agrees with Hartley on this one. But so can I ask you guys a question? This is a total zig and zag, and I apologize, but I really do want to know what you guys think about this. Are we getting an Apple car, or are we getting Apple going to make software for cars?
Oh, this is the argument that I have with my friend. This is the bet, the long-term bet that I have had with a buddy of mine who says there is no way that Apple will ever make a car, like a physical car. And I've had to argue because there are so many rumors out there that they are actually already doing this that I'm like, I would if this was before, maybe 10 years ago, I would agree with you. But like signs are pointing to them. Obviously, they'd have to partner with somebody. No, I know. And I'm saying like I'm still on team. Yes, they are going to make a car as opposed to, what they're doing with CarPlay. Although one would think like CarPlay makes the most sense but it's car manufacturers are so freaking stubborn that they all apparently think that they're so good at making their own infotainment system and software better than a company who has been doing this for forever and who has already got a built-in reputation of making good stuff. They refuse. So they only implement bits and pieces of CarPlay. GM decided, you know what, we don't need CarPlay anymore. We don't need Android Auto. We have our own thing that is apparently better. Tesla does the same thing, which Tesla isn't bad, but still there are so many people who want CarPlay. So going around in a circle, though, I do still think they're going to make that car. With who did they partner with? Was it Hyundai or Honda? I always confuse that. Hartley, do you know?
Hyundai.
They've partnered with through the process. They've been rumored to be pairing with so many different manufacturers at this point. I don't think it's pinned down exactly who they're working with. But I think the answer to the question is both. And there's good reason for that, particularly with the software. So we know that they are definitely working on a car. I mean, they've got test tracks. They make filings with government organizations to regulate their self-driving vehicles, and that's not technology for self-driving vehicles; it's hardware. So there's a lot that suggests that this is physically coming. I mean, they hire design chiefs from Lamborghini. That's for the physical design of a vehicle. So that is definitely happening. But the reason why they are providing this new CarPlay experience, it's almost obvious. because it's like a Trojan horse. So what you do is you give people a taste of that ecosystem. You think, yeah, I love having my widgets on my dashboard syncing with my iPhone. So then when you come and buy a new car, then well, why would I buy
like iMessage?
this?
It sounds like iMessage, Hartley. We just talked about this.
But they already have that market. This
True.
is getting into
True.
other, say you love BMW and you've always had BMW, but now you're using this full screen CarPlay experience in your BMW, and they're all electric now as well. So you can no longer say that BMW is providing that unique sort of driving experience that's part of their brand. It's all changed. It's changing very quickly, and you're using something that integrates with Apple's ecosystem so deeply. Why not just buy the Apple car next time around? And that's why they're doing it. And that is why some car manufacturers want to go absolutely nowhere near CarPlay, because they know it is a Trojan horse. And they know that it is so dangerous to get consumers kind of hooked on CarPlay, because that's where it's going to end up. And that's where GM's fears ultimately come from. And I'm sure those are the conversations that have gone on behind closed doors. Yeah. They just handled it terribly. But there are other manufacturers, like I'm pretty sure... I can't remember if it's Mercedes, but there are large manufacturers that are saying we will not offer that next generation CarPlay experience. You see it with some of the smaller manufacturers like Jaguar Land Rover. Volkswagen's huge. Porsche, those guys are doing it. They are hedging their bets that they can stand up to an Apple car long term. But other manufacturers are just thinking this is way too dangerous, because you're giving customers a sample of something. You're getting them engaged in something that they won't want to stop, and is a future rival. And they know that. They can see what Apple's doing. Yeah. Apple's having discussions with half of them. It's an open secret what Apple's working on.
Jon, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, of course.
It's been a fun conversation of going back and forth and deciding whether or not we all really do love Apple. Do you have anything you want to plug today, or where can we all find you? I think everybody knows.
I just appreciate you guys having me on. I love getting a chance to talk, and I think you guys balance each other out, I think, really well too. I love the podcast. You guys do an awesome job, and I appreciate you letting me be a small part of it today.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much.